It started like any other hearing, until a whistleblower named a teacher. The room didn't erupt. It froze. Faces changed. And Letitia James vanished from the conversation. It began quietly. April 9, 2025. A subcommittee hearing few had scheduled to watch. The topic: Review of Prosecutorial Priorities and Interagency Cooperation. Sounded as dry as the room looked. Even C-SPAN's chairman seemed half asleep. Letitia James, New York's Attorney General, sat alone at the witness table, postured disciplined. She had appeared before Congress before. She had weathered inquiries with the kind of steady focus typical of career prosecutors. Her staff stood behind her. Nothing about the scene looked unusual. Except for the eyes. Congressman Jim Jordan scanned his notes. Across from him, Pam Bondi sat quietly, her notepad blank. She hadn't touched her pen. Yet. Jordan began as expected. Measured. Focused on process. Then, slowly, his line turned. "We're not here to relitigate an election," he said, "but to ask if government power was used to silence dissent." Letitia didn't shift. Her jaw tightened just slightly. Next came the quote, a campaign remark Letitia had made in 2018. "I will use every legal tool to make sure Donald Trump never sees the White House again." It had been reported before. But hearing it now, in this room, had a different weight. "Would you call that justice?" Jordan asked. "Or targeting?" Letitia's voice was firm. "Every elected official has a duty to uphold the law. I've done mine." Bondi's first words came 10 minutes later. Her tone calm. "Before you reviewed a single case file, you pledged to take him down. Explain how that aligns with prosecutorial ethics." Letitia paused. Intent is not the same as action. But the room was shifting. Slowly. The language didn't escalate. The volume didn't change. But eyes narrowed. Posture straightened. Viewers who had left the TV on for background were now listening. Then came the first witness. A retired schoolteacher, 63 years old. She gave only her first name, Marla. She sat forward, hands clasped, voice thin but unwavering. "I posted on Facebook. Just concerns about mail-in ballots. I never thought that would bring agents to my house." Gasps didn't follow. Instead, there was silence, absorbing silence. The kind that comes not from disbelief, but from recognition. Pam Bondi asked, "Did they say who sent them?" "They said they were acting on a referral from the New York Attorney General's office." Letitia James straightened. "That's inaccurate," she said. Jordan leaned in. "Do you deny coordinating with federal agencies on election-related speech?" "We coordinate for safety." Bondi responded simply. "Is it coordination when you flag citizens for what they say?" Letitia didn't answer. Because the next witness had already walked in. He introduced himself by first name only. Former DOJ field officer. Neatly pressed suit, even tone. No dramatics. Just a fact pattern. "I served 20 years, he said. "I left when the directives changed." He looked directly at Letitia James. "I was asked to flag social media posts. Not threats. Not plots. Just language, phrases like ballot fraud or election rigging." He paused. "We were told to forward those names to a list maintained by the New York Attorney General's office." A pause followed. Then he added, "I have the emails." Pam Bondi stood. "Mr. Chairman, we request those emails be entered into the record." The chairman replied, "So ordered." Letitia spoke. "That's a distortion of interagency protocol." But she didn't deny the emails. Bondi read from one aloud. "Attached are accounts with repeat engagement on voter disinformation. Prioritize known Trump-affiliated handles." Then another. "Keep profiles on standby for early discreditation if public momentum grows." Letitia's response was neutral. "We review data aggressively because the risk of chaos is real." Jordan looked up. 79 of 84 flagged accounts were conservative. Letitia's reply came slowly. "Correlation does not imply bias." Bondi didn't flinch. "But intent is what we're here to examine." The room paused again, not shocked, but still. Then came the next witness. Graham Devlin. Mid-50s. Quiet. Once a compliance officer in the NYG's data team. He had filed a whistleblower disclosure just weeks earlier. He began flatly. "I believe the law was a shield. That changed in 2021. Bondi asked. "What changed?" "There was a directive, never in writing, to prioritize cases with Trump-linked individuals. That meant more staff, faster subpoenas, and less review. He pulled a manila envelope from his bag. Inside, a memo marked, "Confidential, Internal Strategy." Jordan read, "We cannot afford to appear soft on Trump-linked entities. All filings must be elevated to red tier." Jordan asked, "What is red tier?" Devlin answered, "Top priority. Media coordination. Legal fast track. Federal liaison involved." Letitia finally responded, "Red tier is common in high-profile cases. Not political." Bondi spoke clearly. "Unless high-profile means politically affiliated." Devlin's final remark came without emotion. "When I asked questions, I was told this was bigger than me." He didn't look at Letitia when he said it. Bondi turned to the panel. 3 witnesses. 3 themes: monitored speech, shared names, strategic enforcement. The chairman gave no comment. But the silence in the chamber had weight. Then Bondi turned to the projector. A new document. Stamped. Draft. Internal only. Title: Coordinated Strategy. NYG and Federal Partners. She read, "Political volatility must be managed at the narrative level. Statements from Trump-affiliated figures must be rapidly challenged, formally or informally, to prevent drift." She asked plainly, "Do you recall approving this?" Letitia replied, "That draft was never finalized." Bondi nodded. "But it was circulated. And acted on." No answer followed. Because the next file waiting to be shown was no longer internal. It was public. And personal. The next document wasn't confidential. It wasn't marked. It was simply printed from a browser. But it changed the hearing. Pam Bondi clicked the projector. A simple slide appeared. Subject: Urgent action, Fairview rally planning. Time-stamped 8:12 a.m., one day after a Trump-aligned event in Long Island. She read aloud. "Confirm if any individuals on the attached list have actionable legal exposure, even minor infractions, e.g., parking citations, expired registrations, code violations." She looked up. "Madam Attorney General, can you explain why your office was reviewing parking tickets from political rallies?" Letitia James answered without pause. "We monitor public events for safety and compliance." Bondi waited. Safety? Or leverage? No reply came. But the next witness did. Elliot Monroe. Late 40s. Business owner. Hands rough, voice careful. "I'm not here because I want to be," he said. "I'm here because I lost everything." He described his first ever speech at a local school board meeting. Concerned about his daughter's curriculum. 3 minutes, that's all. 3 weeks later, his business account was frozen. No warning. Then came a letter, a records request from the New York Attorney General's office. They asked for payroll, licenses, tax documents. 15 years I ran that hardware store," he said. "No complaints. No lawsuits." Bondi asked if he knew why. "I filed the FOIA. Took months. When it came back, my name was on a list. Public Disruption Monitoring. That's what it was called." Letitia's reply came carefully. "Public disruption lists are standard risk assessment tools." Jordan asked, "Were those lists shared with banks?" Letitia didn't answer. Bondi showed the next slide. Elliot Monroe, flagged for early escalation. Monitor for financial leverage if visibility increases. She said nothing else. Elliot unfolded another paper. A foreclosure notice. I sold the building to pay the loan. Wasn't charged. Wasn't investigated. Just watched. Then erased. No one responded. Bondi said quietly, "This is what happens when the law becomes selective. Not enforcement. Just pressure." Letitia said nothing. Her aide leaned in, whispered something. She nodded faintly but didn't speak. Then Bondi reached into her folder. A USB drive. Unlabeled. "This," she said, "was recovered by a whistleblower. It contains internal interface screenshots from the NYG's digital archive." The screen changed again. Now it showed a dashboard. Clean rows. Tabs marked Risk Rating, Narrative Drift, Early Escalation Candidates. The header read, Election Integrity Flag List, Internal Use Only. Bondi spoke plainly. "This is not summary data. It's a live monitoring system, used to flag Americans not for violence or fraud, but for what they say." She clicked through. Subject: Tweeted ballots should be counted transparently. Status: Elevate if media attention increases. Subject, shared sermon, faith over fear. Status, review for nonprofit compliance. Letitia interrupted. The system was reference only. Not for enforcement. Bondi asked. Reference for what? Silence. Jordan leaned in. How many names were entered? Letitia replied after a beat. Approximately 2,000. Gasps now. Real ones? Bondi didn't raise her voice. You flagged 2,000 Americans for speaking publicly? Letitia's reply. They were not prosecuted. But monitored, Bondi said. Profiled. Tagged. The screen froze. And for the first time, members of both parties were quiet. Because this wasn't about whether something went too far. It was about whether a system had been built for exactly that. They returned from recess, but not from doubt. Something had shifted. Not loud. Not declared. Just real. Letitia James sat steady. Her tone hadn't cracked. But fewer people believed what she said. Pam Bondi stood again. She wasn't reading from a witness statement now. This time it was an email thread. Subject: messaging strategy for anticipated Trump property seizures. Timestamped, 6 weeks before any public filing. Bondi read aloud. Ensure early framing aligns with rule of law justification. Avoid language that could generate undue public sympathy. She looked up. This was before any warrants were signed. You weren't reacting to public concern. You were preparing how to shape it. Letitia replied quickly. High-profile legal actions require coordinated communications. That's standard. Bondi stayed calm. Preparing? Or deciding the story before the facts existed? Jordan leaned forward. You weren't informing the public. You were managing the outcome. Letitia didn't respond. Then Bondi held up a deposition, sworn testimony from a former digital compliance staffer. It wasn't long. One paragraph stood out. The office maintained a tag called Repeat Agitator. It didn't require a criminal history. Just prior criticism. She showed the interface again. This time, a filtered view. Subject: local podcast host, flagged 3 times for election skepticism. Status: monitor if picked up by media. Tag: potential visibility concern. Letitia answered. We were tracking disinformation risks. Bondi asked. And who decided what counted as disinformation? A prosecutor? A dashboard? Still no answer. The next slide was a spreadsheet. Hundreds of names. Some with addresses. Others with tags. Suppress before cycle. Review tax filings if trend continues. Pause exposure escalation. Jordan didn't comment. He just stared. Bondi said plainly. These aren't investigative leads. They're talking points, mapped to people. Letitia finally spoke again. The political environment required proactive risk assessments. The threats were real. Bondi nodded. So is the Constitution. No raised voices. No outbursts. But the tone had changed. The hearing was no longer about explaining actions. It was about revealing systems. The kind that operate quietly. The kind that flag people not for crimes, but for patterns. And the kind that only surface when someone refuses to look away. The next document came without context. Pam Bondi simply placed it on the overhead. A map. Nothing fancy, just counties shaded in soft red and blue. But in the bottom corner, a small legend appeared. Narrative Risk Index, Cycle Preparedness Tiering. She said one line. This was not made by a polling firm. This was internal. Letitia James didn't interrupt. Bondi moved to the next slide. A chart. Rows of names. Columns for disruption score, media pickup potential, and escalation vector. It wasn't abstract. It was operational. Each cell was filled in. A suburban pastor. A retired nurse. A former city councilman. Their comments were quoted. Their church groups and podcasts noted. Each assigned a level, from monitor to leverage candidate. Bondi spoke slowly. None of these individuals were under investigation. None had criminal referrals. They were just visible. Letitia said quietly. Visibility can trigger risk in unstable environments. Jordan responded. And your answer to instability was to monitor it like a campaign? Bondi clicked forward. An email appeared. Subject: rapid response triggers, October pushback anticipation. Body: if opposition content exceeds threshold, initiates suppressive engagement using trusted media surrogates. Letitia's voice stayed measured. This wasn't enforcement. It was preparation. Bondi said. Preparation for what? No answer. Then the final line of the email appeared on screen. Public disagreement must not go unchallenged in early cycle months. The room was still. Again. Bondi turned to the chairman. These aren't tools for justice. They're frameworks for perception. The chairman didn't answer. Because the next witness was already at the table. A young woman. Early 30s. Quiet. She gave only her first name, Rachel. I started a local newsletter during COVID, she said. I wanted to share data. That's all. She talked about being contacted by a third-party verification group that asked her to revise or retract a piece on absentee ballot procedures. I ignored it. Thought it was spam. A week later, my site traffic dropped 80%. My hosting service cited security policy changes. She filed a records request. What came back included her name on the election integrity flag list. The tag, narrative risk, active. Below that, target for algorithmic deamplification pending third-party review. Bondi didn't speak. She didn't need to. Because the question was already in the air. How many others were silenced by a system they never saw? The screen behind Pam Bondi flickered once. Then it showed a final image, an internal slide deck marked engagement strategy, faith, family, and fear nodes. Bondi didn't narrate. She clicked through. Slide 1. Monitor religious content for populist crossover. Slide 2. Tag messaging with escalation if repeated in faith circles. Slide 3. Engage nonprofit status reviews for influential sermons. Letitia James shifted slightly. Not shaken, but still. Bondi asked quietly. Can you confirm these slides were circulated in your office? Letitia didn't look at the screen. Not in this form. Jordan spoke next. But in some form? Letitia paused. In discussion, perhaps. As part of broader risk mapping. Bondi folded her arms. The First Amendment doesn't make space for risk mapping sermons. The next document was short. Just 3 bullet points. Increase scrutiny of outspoken business owners with online platforms. Push early legal queries to avoid post-incident justifications. Encourage financial reviews when engagement spikes. Bondi said nothing. Neither did Jordan. Because a system like that doesn't need many words. It explains itself. Then Rachel, the newsletter writer, spoke again. Not loudly. I'm not political. I didn't vote in 2020. I just posted about how mail-in ballots were counted. She didn't look angry. She looked tired. They didn't shut down my site. They just made it vanish. A moment passed. Letitia said. No directive was ever issued to silence individuals. Bondi replied. But individuals were silenced. Then came the spreadsheet. Unfiltered. Unlabeled. Just rows of names and a final column. Media Exposure Response Plan, suggested framing. Pam Bondi read one aloud. If named in public hearing, frame as fringe or partisan. Avoid platforming unless unavoidable. Letitia said softly. These were contingency documents. Not implementation. Jordan leaned forward. When every contingency becomes action, it's not a plan. It's policy. The screen went dark. Bondi didn't move. She turned to the committee. This wasn't about threats. It was about control. Quiet, coordinated, legally ambiguous control. The kind that flags. Tracks, prepares. Just in case people stop agreeing. The silence returned, not stunned, but full. Because at that point, even the denials were confirming something. A system had been built. Its rules were vague. Its intent just plausible enough. Its targets uncharged but watched. And it had a name. Election Integrity Flag List. What followed next wouldn't be legal analysis or televised debate. It would be something slower. Heavier. A public reckoning that hadn't yet finished forming. The chairman gave Letitia James a final opportunity to speak. Her voice was even. I've served with integrity. I regret any perception of overreach. But I stand by the purpose, protecting democratic stability. No one interrupted. No one applauded. Pam Bondi waited until the pause settled. Then she leaned toward the mic, steady as ever. No one's questioning your purpose. We're questioning your tools. She let the words rest. Jordan followed. You said it was about protecting democracy. But democracy doesn't work if ordinary people are afraid to speak. He held up one page. A transcript. This is from your own public podcast. We cannot let Trump near the White House again. We'll use every legal avenue to stop him. That was months before any filing. He lowered the page. Intent matters. Bondi stood again. She didn't raise her voice. This isn't about Trump. It's about whether a father can speak at a school board meeting without having his tax records pulled. Whether a pastor can deliver a sermon without being tagged for review. Whether a teacher can share a Facebook post and still feel safe in her own home. Letitia James didn't respond. She looked down. Not defeated. But silent. The chairman banged the gavel once. This committee will reconvene next week to review subpoena compliance and determine next steps. Reporters stood fast. Phones buzzed. The hearing had ended. But no one felt like it had. Letitia remained seated. Her legal poise was intact. Her voice never cracked. But control had changed hands. Not to Congress. Not to Bondi. To the public. Because the story no longer belonged to her. Pam Bondi gathered her notes. She didn't smile. She didn't linger. As she passed Letitia James, she leaned in briefly. Not performative. Just close enough to be heard. You underestimated what this hearing would become. Letitia didn't answer. Not then. Not on record. Outside the chamber, headlines were already rolling. 2,000 Americans flagged. Whistleblower shows targeting of speech. NYG dashboard raises legal alarms. But the deeper reaction came slower. Not in outrage, but in reevaluation. Across the country, teachers, pastors, parents, all those mentioned, directly or indirectly, began asking new questions. Not about surveillance. About systems. Because what the hearing showed wasn't a scandal. It was infrastructure. And once seen, it couldn't be unseen. There would be no sequel. No breaking news follow-up. But that was the point. The system hadn't collapsed. It had been illuminated. The reckoning wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. But it had already started. And it belonged to everyone now.